On a cold February morning in 1996, in a small apartment on Detroit's East Side, a young woman named Shanice Williams stopped answering her phone. She was 23 years old, a nursing student at Wayne County Community College, known for calling her mother every single morning before her 7 a.m. shift at the cafeteria. When her mother, Dorothy Williams, couldn't reach her that Thursday, she felt something her daughter would later describe as a coldness that started in my chest and spread. By noon, when Shanice still hadn't shown up for work, hadn't called, hadn't responded to the 17 messages left on her answering machine, Dorothy drove across town with her hands shaking on the wheel. What she found when the building superintendent finally opened that apartment door would haunt Detroit for nearly 3 decades. Shanice Williams lay on her bedroom floor, strangled with the cord from her own bedside lamp. And the question that would echo through courtrooms and living rooms and sleepless nights for years to come was this: how could someone vanish from a locked apartment building, leaving behind a young woman's body and not a single witness, not a single clue, not a single answer? The East Side of Detroit in 1996 was a place of contradictions. Tree-lined streets gave way suddenly to vacant lots where houses had burned or been torn down. Churches stood solid on corners where grocery stores had closed. The neighborhood where Shanice lived, just off Gratiot Avenue near the old Chrysler plant, had seen better days, but it held on. Families still swept their porches. Kids still played in the streets when weather allowed. The apartment building where Shanice rented a second-floor unit was a 3-story brick structure built in the 1950s, when Detroit's auto industry was booming and optimism came standard. By the 90s, the building showed its age. The hallway carpets were worn thin, the radiators clanked and hissed. But it was clean, relatively safe, and the superintendent, a man named Marcus Chen who lived in the basement unit, kept watch over his tenants with the careful attention of someone who'd seen neighborhoods change and wanted this one to hold. Shanice Williams had moved into apartment 2B in September of 1995, just after her 23rd birthday. She was the youngest of 3 daughters, raised by Dorothy Williams in a small house in Highland Park after Shanice's father died when she was 7. Those who knew Shanice described her as quiet but determined. She worked the early cafeteria shift at the college to pay for her classes. She studied late into the night, her desk lamp visible from the street below, a steady square of yellow light that neighbors came to recognize. She wore her hair in braids she did herself every Sunday evening while watching television. She kept her apartment neat. She called her mother every morning at 6:15, without fail, a habit that had started when Dorothy had surgery the previous year and had simply continued, because it made both women feel connected across the miles between Highland Park and the East Side. Thursday, February 15, 1996, began like any other winter morning in Detroit. The temperature had dropped to 19 degrees overnight. A light snow had fallen around 4 a.m., just enough to dust the cars parked along the street. In apartment 2B, Shanice's alarm clock went off at 5:30, as it did every weekday. Her neighbor across the hall, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patricia Odoms, heard it through the thin walls. She heard it ring for perhaps 20 seconds before it was silenced. Mrs. Odoms would later tell police that she heard nothing else unusual. No voices, no struggle, no footsteps in the hallway. At 6:15, when Shanice should have called her mother, the phone in apartment 2B remained silent. Dorothy Williams first felt worry at 6:30. By 7 o'clock, when she'd called Shanice's number 6 times and gotten only the answering machine, worry had become fear. By 8 o'clock, when the college cafeteria manager called Dorothy to ask if Shanice was sick because she hadn't shown up for her shift, fear had become certainty that something was terribly wrong. Dorothy called the police at 8:23 a.m. The dispatcher, following protocol, explained that an adult missing for less than 24 hours didn't typically warrant immediate response. Dorothy, in a voice that the dispatcher would later recall as calm but absolutely sure, said 4 words: "Something happened to her." The dispatcher heard something in that certainty. She sent a patrol car. Officers Michael Kowalski and Jennifer Hayes arrived at the apartment building at 9:05 a.m. The building superintendent, Marcus Chen, met them in the lobby with a ring of keys in his hand. He told them Shanice was a good tenant, quiet, always paid rent on time. He'd seen her the previous evening around 8 p.m. carrying groceries up the stairs. She'd smiled at him, said goodnight. Everything had seemed normal. The three of them climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled of cooking grease and old radiator heat. Apartment 2B was the third door on the left. Officer Kowalski knocked first. 3 sharp raps. Detroit Police. Shanice Williams, are you in there? Silence. He knocked again. Mrs. Odoms opened her door across the hall, clutching a robe around her thin frame. Is she all right? She asked. I heard her alarm this morning like always. Marcus Chen unlocked the door. It swung open onto a small, neat living room. Textbooks stacked on a coffee table. A coat hung on a hook by the door. Dishes washed and drying in the kitchen. No sign of disturbance. Officer Hayes called out, Miss Williams. They moved through the apartment. Kitchen empty, bathroom empty. And then Officer Kowalski pushed open the bedroom door. Shanice Williams lay on her back beside the bed. She wore the oversized t-shirt and sweatpants she'd apparently slept in. Her eyes were half open, her face discolored. The lamp cord, still attached to the bedside lamp, was wound tightly around her neck. Officer Hayes immediately radioed for detectives and the medical examiner. Officer Kowalski, who had been on the force for 11 years, stood in the doorway of that small bedroom and felt his stomach turn. The scene was wrong in ways that would take the investigators hours to fully catalog. The bed was made, or nearly made, as if Shanice had pulled up the covers that morning. Her slippers sat beside the bed, neatly paired. Her nursing textbook lay open on the nightstand, a highlighter marking her place. The window was locked from the inside. The front door had been locked. Nothing appeared stolen. Her purse sat on the dresser, wallet inside, $37 in cash undisturbed. And there was something else, something that Officer Kowalski noticed immediately but couldn't quite name. The room felt staged. Too neat, too calm for a place where someone had died violently. Clear's throat. Detroit Police Detective Sergeant Raymond Booker arrived at the scene at 9:45 a.m. He was 41 years old, a 20-year veteran of the department who'd worked homicide for the last 7. He stood just inside the bedroom doorway for a full 3 minutes without speaking, his eyes moving methodically across the space. His partner, Detective Lisa Tran, a sharp-eyed investigator known for her attention to detail, stood beside him. She was the one who first spoke the thought both were having. This doesn't feel right, she said quietly. Booker nodded. No, he agreed. It doesn't. The medical examiner, Dr. Harold Weinstein, arrived at 10:30. He pronounced Shanice Williams dead at the scene and estimated time of death between 6 and 8 a.m. that morning, based on body temperature and the early stages of rigor mortis. Cause of death appeared to be strangulation by ligature, specifically the lamp cord wound around her neck. But even Dr. Weinstein, kneeling beside the body in that small bedroom, noted inconsistencies. The force required for this, he said to Detective Booker, it's significant, and look at her hands. No defensive wounds, no skin under the fingernails. If someone attacked her, where's the struggle? The crime scene technicians photographed everything. They dusted for prints. They collected trace evidence, fibers from the carpet, samples from under Shanice's fingernails despite the lack of visible material. They noted that the apartment door showed no signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. The chain lock, which Shanice's mother confirmed she always used, was unlatched but showed no damage. Mrs. Odoms, interviewed in the hallway while technicians worked, insisted she'd heard nothing unusual. The walls here are thin, she said. I can hear when someone drops a book. I would have heard a fight. Detective Tran walked through the apartment again, this time focusing not on what was there but on what wasn't. No overturned furniture, no knocked-over lamps or scattered belongings. The deadbolt on the front door required a key to lock from the outside, but could be locked from the inside with a simple turn. If someone had left and locked the door behind them, they would have needed a key. Tran asked Marcus Chen about keys. He kept a master set in his apartment, he said, but they were accounted for. Only 2 keys to apartment 2B existed otherwise. The one Shanice kept on a ring with her car key, found in her purse, and a spare she'd given to her mother, which Dorothy confirmed was still hanging on a hook in her kitchen. By noon, Dorothy Williams had arrived at the building, held back by officers in the lobby as detectives worked upstairs. She sat on the bottom step, her hands clasped between her knees, and she asked the question that no one could yet answer. Who would hurt my baby? Who would do this? Shanice's older sisters, Keisha and Tamara, arrived shortly after. The 3 women held each other in that dingy lobby while upstairs, in apartment 2B, investigators tried to piece together the final hours of Shanice's life. The search for evidence expanded that afternoon. Detectives canvassed the building, knocking on every door. 13 units occupied, 11 residents home and willing to talk. No one had heard anything unusual the night before or that morning. The tenant in apartment 2A, directly below Shanice, had left for work at 5 a.m. before Shanice's alarm went off. The tenant above her worked nights and had been asleep until nearly noon. The pattern repeated in every interview. No sounds of struggle, no voices raised, no footsteps running in the hallway. Detective Booker pulled the building's security footage, what little there was. One camera in the lobby, aimed at the front entrance. The tape showed residents coming and going throughout Wednesday evening. Marcus Chen carrying a bag of salt for the front steps at 7 p.m., an older man walking a small dog at 7:30. And there, at 8:05, Shanice Williams, pushing through the front door with 2 plastic grocery bags in her hands. She wore her winter coat and a knit hat. She moved with the casual ease of someone coming home after an ordinary errand. She walked toward the stairs and disappeared from the camera's view. The tape continued. At 8:40, a couple came in, laughing about something, their voices picked up faintly on the audio. At 9:15, a man Booker didn't recognize entered the lobby. He wore a dark jacket, jeans, work boots. He walked with purpose toward the stairs. The timestamp read 9:17 p.m. Booker rewound and played it again. The man's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but his build was clear. Average height, maybe 5'10" or 5'11", broad shoulders, walking with the slight hitch of someone favoring his left leg. Booker froze the frame and zoomed in as much as the grainy footage would allow. The man's face, what little was visible, seemed familiar, but Booker couldn't place it. He made a note to show the tape to the building residents. Thursday night moved into Friday morning. The investigation grew. Forensic teams finished processing apartment 2B. Around 3 a.m. they took the lamp cord, now carefully bagged as evidence. They took samples of everything: carpet fibers, hair from the brush on Shanice's dresser, trace elements from the window sill. They photographed the made bed, the neat arrangement of her things, the textbook still open to the chapter on cardiovascular nursing. And they carried out Shanice's body in a black bag, while Mrs. Odoms watched from her doorway, crying softly into her hands. By Friday afternoon, Detective Tran had conducted 23 interviews. Friends from Shanice's classes described her as dedicated, kind, someone who studied hard and kept mostly to herself. Her supervisor at the cafeteria said she was reliable, never missed a shift, always arrived exactly on time. Her ex-boyfriend from high school, now married and living in Southfield, provided an alibi for Wednesday night and expressed genuine shock at the news. No one could think of anyone who would want to hurt Shanice. No enemies, no threats, no stalkers or unwanted attention that anyone knew about. The autopsy, conducted Friday morning by Dr. Weinstein, confirmed strangulation as the cause of death. Time of death was refined, between 5:45 and 6:30 a.m. on Thursday, February 15th. The narrowed window mattered. It meant Shanice had been killed right around the time her alarm went off, in those minutes when Mrs. Odoms had heard the alarm ring and then stop. Dr. Weinstein noted petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes, consistent with asphyxiation. He noted the deep furrow in the skin of her neck where the cord had cut in. But he also noted in his careful medical language an observation that troubled him. The pattern of injury suggests prolonged pressure rather than a violent struggle. Subject's arms show no defensive bruising, fingernails intact and clean. Toxicology pending, but preliminary exam suggests subject may have been unconscious or heavily sedated when ligature was applied. Clear's throat. This detail changed everything. If Shanice had been sedated, the question became, when? How? By whom? Detective Booker ordered rush processing on the toxicology screen. He also sent a team back to apartment 2B to search for any medication bottles, any drinks or food that might have been tampered with. They found nothing unusual. A bottle of ibuprofen in the bathroom cabinet, half a carton of orange juice in the refrigerator, leftover pasta in a container. None of it appeared disturbed. The man on the security footage became a priority. Friday evening, Booker and Tran showed the grainy image to every resident in the building. Marcus Chen studied it longest. "I can't be sure," he said finally, "but the build, the way he walks, it might be Terrence Davis. He used to visit someone in the building, Terrence Davis." The name sent a small current through the investigation. Tran pulled up records. Terrence Davis, age 28, worked maintenance at the Chrysler plant until it closed in 1994, currently employed by a janitorial service. Prior arrests. Domestic assault in 1993, charges dropped. Possession of marijuana in 1991, pled guilty to a misdemeanor. His last known address was an apartment building 6 blocks away. And his girlfriend, until 3 months earlier, had been a woman named Sandra Miller, who lived in apartment 3A, directly above Shanice Williams. Saturday morning, detectives Booker and Tran knocked on the door of Terrence Davis's apartment. A woman answered, bleary-eyed, holding a toddler on her hip. Terrence's current girlfriend. No, he wasn't home. He'd left for work around 6 a.m. Worked Saturdays cleaning office buildings downtown. Booker left his card and told her to have Terrence call as soon as he returned. They visited Sandra Miller next. She confirmed that Terrence had been her boyfriend, that he'd visited her apartment regularly until they broke up in November. Did he know Shanice Williams? Tran asked. Sandra thought about it, maybe to say hi in the hallway. She was quiet, kept to herself. Terrence Davis called Detective Booker at 2:30 that afternoon. He agreed to come to the precinct for an interview. He arrived at 4 p.m. driving a battered Ford pickup. He wore work clothes still, smelling faintly of cleaning chemicals. In the interview room, he sat with his hands on the table, open, relaxed. Yes, he knew there'd been a death in the building. He'd heard about it. Terrible thing. Did he know Shanice Williams? Only in passing. Seen her in the hallway maybe a dozen times when he was visiting Sandra. Said hello, that's it. Was he in the building Wednesday night? He paused. Yeah, actually he was. He'd stopped by to drop off some of Sandra's mail that had been delivered to his place by mistake. What time? Around 9:15 maybe. Booker showed him the security footage still. Is this you? Terrence squinted at the image. Yeah, that's me. I told you I was there. How long did he stay? Maybe 10-15 minutes. Just gave Sandra the mail, chatted for a bit, then left. Did he go anywhere else in the building? No. Straight to Sandra's apartment on the 3rd floor and back down. Did he see Shanice Williams? Number didn't see anyone actually. Building was quiet. The interview continued for 90 minutes. Terrence's story remained consistent. He had no reason to hurt Shanice. Barely knew her. Hadn't seen her Wednesday night. Left the building around 9:30 and went home. His current girlfriend could confirm he was home by 10. Booker watched him carefully. Terrence Davis seemed calm, almost unnaturally so for someone being questioned about a murder. But calm wasn't guilt, and nothing in his story contradicted the known facts. Not yet. The investigation broadened. Police searched Terrence Davis's apartment with his permission. They found nothing connecting him to Shanice Williams. No photographs, no mementos, no evidence of any relationship beyond passing acquaintance. His fingerprints, taken during the booking process for his prior arrests, were compared to prints lifted from apartment 2B. None matched, though the apartment had yielded surprisingly few clear prints at all, another oddity that troubled the investigators. The toxicology report came back on Tuesday, February 20th. Shanice Williams had significant levels of zolpidem in her system, a sedative commonly sold as Ambien. Enough to induce heavy sleep, possibly unconsciousness. But Shanice had no prescription for sleeping pills. Her mother confirmed she'd never known her daughter to take them. A search of Shanice's trash, her medicine cabinet, her apartment yielded no pill bottles, no packaging. Someone had given her that drug or somehow introduced it into something she consumed. But how? When? Detectives returned to the groceries. The receipt found in Shanice's purse showed she'd shopped at a grocery store on Gratiot Avenue Wednesday evening, purchasing orange juice, bread, lunch meat, pasta, and a bag of apples. The store's security footage showed her shopping alone at 7:15 p.m., checking out at 7:28, carrying her bags to her car in the parking lot. No one approached her. No one tampered with her purchases. She drove straight home, arriving at the building by 8 p.m. according to neighbors who saw her park. The pasta in her refrigerator was tested. The orange juice was tested. The bread, the apples, everything in her kitchen. No traces of zolpidem, which meant either the source had been consumed completely, leaving no evidence, or the drug had been administered through some other means the investigators hadn't yet identified. For those who have ever worked a case that seems to have no entrance point, no clear path from the world outside to the victim inside, the frustration is profound. Every lead seemed to circle back to locked doors and silent hallways. The physical evidence told a story of someone who'd been killed quietly, efficiently, with access to her apartment and knowledge of how to leave no trace. But who? Everyone cleared. Terrence Davis's alibi checked out. His girlfriend confirmed he'd come home by 10 p.m. Wednesday. Sandra Miller had been home all night. Marcus Chen, the superintendent, had been in his basement apartment, visible on security footage going in at 7 p.m. and not emerging until 6 a.m. Thursday when he left to salt the front steps. Mrs. Odoms couldn't have overpowered anyone. Other building residents had solid alibis or no connection to Shanice. The case file grew thick. Witness statements, forensic reports, photographs. Timelines mapped and remapped, but answers remained elusive. The Detroit police held a press conference on February 22nd, asking anyone with information to come forward. Dorothy Williams stood beside Detective Booker, her face drawn with grief, and made a simple plea. "Someone knows something. Someone saw something. Please help us find who took my daughter." Tips came in, dozens of them. A woman claimed she'd seen a suspicious man lurking near the building Tuesday night. Didn't match any known suspect. A caller insisted Shanice had been involved with drug dealers. No evidence supported this. Another caller, anonymous, suggested checking ex-boyfriends. Already done. Each tip was followed, documented, filed away. Nothing broke the case open. By March, the investigation had slowed. Not from lack of effort, but from lack of direction. Detectives followed up on trace evidence that led nowhere. They re-interviewed witnesses who had nothing new to say. The case, without fresh leads or evidence, began the gradual slide from active investigation to cold case. It wasn't officially declared cold, not yet, but the reality was clear to everyone involved. Someone had killed Shanice Williams in a locked apartment, leaving behind almost no physical evidence and no witnesses, and that person had seemingly vanished into the fabric of the city. For Dorothy Williams and her daughters, March became a month of funerals and grief. They buried Shanice on March 2, 1996, at a cemetery in Highland Park. More than 200 people attended. Friends from school, neighbors from the building, people from Dorothy's church. Detective Booker and Detective Tran came, standing at the back, watching not out of disrespect but from habit, looking for anyone who seemed out of place, anyone whose grief seemed performed or whose presence seemed wrong. They saw nothing unusual, just a community mourning a young woman whose life had been stolen. The months that followed were quiet in the way that cold cases are quiet. The file remained open. Detectives checked in periodically, hoping for new forensic techniques or a witness coming forward. But 1996 became 1997, and 1997 became 1998. The case faded from public memory. The apartment building on Gratiot Avenue remained, its tenants changing over time. Marcus Chen eventually retired and moved to Arizona. Sandra Miller moved out in 1997. Terrence Davis stopped coming around. Life continued, indifferent to the unanswered questions left behind in apartment 2B. Clear's throat, Dorothy Williams never stopped asking those questions. She called Detective Booker every month for the first year, then every few months, then on Shanice's birthday and the anniversary of her death. Booker, who retired in 2008, always took her calls. He remembered Shanice's case the way detectives remember the ones that got away, the ones where you feel the answer is there, just out of reach, if only you could see it from the right angle. In 2003, 7 years after Shanice's death, advances in DNA technology allowed investigators to retest evidence from the case. Samples that had been collected but not fully analyzed in 1996 were submitted to the lab. The process took months. The results, when they came back, showed male DNA on the lamp cord mixed with Shanice's. The profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, searching for a match against known offenders. No hit. The DNA belonged to someone who'd never been arrested for a felony or whose sample had never been collected. Another dead end, or at least a delayed lead. The case file grew dusty. New detectives took over cold cases. Some reviewed Shanice's file, but the evidence told the same frustrating story. A locked room, a quiet death, and a killer who'd left no usable trail. In 2010, the case was featured briefly on a local television program about unsolved murders. The segment showed photographs of Shanice, interviewed Dorothy, who was now 68 and still waiting for answers. The show generated a few calls, none of them substantive. The case receded again into the archives. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, questioned whether their surface composure hid something darker, you understand the corrosive nature of suspicion. In the years following Shanice's murder, Detective Booker, even in retirement, couldn't fully let go of one name: Terrence Davis. Not because Davis had done anything overtly suspicious, but because of small details that never quite settled right. The way he'd been in the building that night, just hours before Shanice died. The slight pause before he'd admitted to being there. His unusual calmness during questioning. These weren't evidence, just instinct. The kind that experienced detectives learn to trust but can't bring to a prosecutor. Booker kept tabs on Davis informally. Through contacts still on the force, he learned Davis had been arrested again in 2004 for domestic assault against a girlfriend. The charges had been dropped. In 2007, Davis had been questioned in connection with a break-in at a storage facility where he worked. Nothing came of it. In 2011, another domestic assault charge, this time resulting in probation. A pattern emerged. Davis had trouble with women, a need for control, and a tendency to be present at the edges of trouble without quite being caught in its center. In 2015, 20 years after Shanice's murder, Michigan passed a law requiring DNA samples from anyone convicted of any felony, not just violent crimes. Terrence Davis, arrested for his third domestic assault incident in 2016 and convicted of a felony assault charge, was required to provide a DNA sample. The sample went into the system, and in the automated way these things happen, A computer in a laboratory somewhere ran comparisons between the new sample and old evidence in unsolved cases. In December 2016, a match came back. The DNA on the lamp cord that killed Shanice Williams matched the DNA of Terrence Davis. The call went out to the Detroit Police Cold Case Unit. Detective Sarah Mendez, who'd been assigned Shanice's case when she joined the unit in 2014, received the notification. She pulled the file, thick with 20 years of investigation, and read it straight through. She saw the same things Booker had seen: Davis in the building that night, Davis's odd composure, his history, and now his DNA on the murder weapon. Not mixed, not transferred innocently, but there, unmistakable on the cord used to strangle Shanice Williams. The case reopened with urgency. Detective Mendez contacted Dorothy Williams, now 74, living with her daughter Keisha in Highland Park. When Mendez told her about the DNA match, Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew someone would remember her. I knew." They talked for an hour. Dorothy's memory of those days in 1996 was crystal clear. She remembered every detail of the last conversation she'd had with Shanice, the Tuesday night before she died. Shanice had been happy, talking about an upcoming exam, making plans to visit for Sunday dinner. Dorothy had told her to be safe, to lock her doors. Shanice had promised, "I always do, Mama. I always do." Mendez built the case methodically. She reviewed the original investigation, finding it solid but limited by the technology of its time. She located and re-interviewed witnesses. Sandra Miller, now in her 50s and living in Warren, remembered Terrence's visit that Wednesday night. She remembered him staying longer than he'd told police, closer to 30 minutes. She remembered something else too, something she'd forgotten or dismissed in 1996. Terrence had asked to use her bathroom, and when he came out, he'd seemed distracted, had left quickly. At the time, she'd thought nothing of it. Now, with detectives asking new questions, she wondered. The building layout became crucial. Sandra's apartment, 3A, sat directly above Shanice's. The bathroom in Sandra's apartment was positioned directly above the bathroom in 2B, a mirror image of the layout. The buildings from that era, Mendez learned, had been built quickly and cheaply. Ventilation shafts connected apartments vertically. The ductwork that carried heat from the basement furnace ran through the walls, and the medicine cabinets in bathrooms on the same vertical line, often backed onto the same shaft space, separated only by thin metal backs. Mendez obtained a warrant to examine the building's structure. The current superintendent gave her access to 3A, now occupied by a different tenant, and to 2B, which had cycled through several residents since 1996. In the bathrooms, she found what she was looking for: the medicine cabinets mounted in the walls, backed with flimsy metal. She had the wall opened carefully. The shaft space between apartments was narrow but accessible. An adult male of average build could reach through from the third-floor bathroom into the space behind the second-floor medicine cabinet. Could potentially remove items. Could potentially insert items. The theory formed. Terrence Davis, visiting Sandra, had excused himself to the bathroom. He'd opened the medicine cabinet, reached through the shaft space, and accessed Shanice's medicine cabinet below. Whether he'd done it that night or on an earlier visit, he'd planted the sleeping pills, or somehow introduced the drug into something Shanice would consume. Then, early Thursday morning, he'd returned. The security footage only showed the lobby. He could have entered through a basement window or a side door that didn't latch properly. Building security in 1996 had been minimal. He'd gone to Shanice's apartment while she was sedated, gained entry somehow, and strangled her with the lamp cord. Then he'd left, locking the door behind him, confident that the locked room mystery would keep investigators away from him. It was elaborate, but it fit the facts, and now there was DNA evidence. The warrant for Terrence Davis's arrest was issued on January 18, 2017. A team of officers found him at his workplace, a warehouse in Dearborn where he worked as a forklift operator. He was loading trucks at 6 a.m. when 4 squad cars pulled into the lot. Officers approached with weapons drawn. "Terrence Davis, you're under arrest for the murder of Shanice Williams." Davis, now 49 years old, gray creeping into his hair, looked genuinely confused. "Who?" he said, then as it registered. "That was 20 years ago. I didn't do anything." They cuffed him. Read him his rights. Drove him to the precinct where, 2 decades earlier, Detective Booker had questioned him for 90 minutes and let him walk away. This time, the interrogation lasted 6 hours. Davis denied everything. Yes, his DNA was on the lamp cord, but he couldn't explain how. Maybe he'd touched the lamp when he was visiting Sandra. Detectives pointed out he'd never been in apartment 2B. Davis shifted his story. Maybe there was a mistake with the DNA. Maybe the sample was contaminated. His lawyer, a public defender named Marcus Riley, stopped the interview eventually, but not before Davis had talked himself into corners he couldn't escape. The case against Terrence Davis went to trial in October 2023. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Cho, presented the DNA evidence as incontrovertible. She presented the theory of access through the medicine cabinet shaft. She presented Davis's history of violence against women. She presented the original investigation records showing his presence in the building hours before Shanice died. She called Dorothy Williams to the stand, where at 80 years old, she testified in a clear, strong voice about her daughter's life, and the phone call that never came that Thursday morning. The defense argued contamination, coincidence, reasonable doubt. How could the prosecution prove when or how Davis's DNA got on the lamp cord? How could they prove he'd entered apartment 2B? There were no witnesses, no security footage showing him on the second floor, no confession. The medicine cabinet theory was just that, a theory. And 20 years was a long time for memories to remain reliable and evidence to remain uncompromised. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On October 27, 2023, they returned a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Terrence Davis showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Dorothy Williams, sitting in the front row with her daughters beside her, closed her eyes and wept silently. After 27 years, someone had been held accountable. Sentencing came in December. Judge Patricia Morrison heard victim impact statements from Dorothy, from Keisha and Tamara, from friends who'd never forgotten Shanice. Dorothy spoke last. She said, "My daughter was 23 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. Someone took that. Someone stole her future and mine and her sister's. For 27 years, I woke up every morning wondering who and why. Now I know who. I'll never understand why. But I know Shanice can rest now. We all can." Judge Morrison sentenced Terrence Davis to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Davis was led from the courtroom in shackles. As he passed, he looked at Dorothy Williams. She met his eyes and did not look away. What passed between them in that moment was witnessed by everyone in the courtroom, but understood, perhaps, only by them. The gaze of a mother who'd waited nearly 3 decades for justice, and the look of a man who would spend the rest of his life behind bars for a crime he'd gotten away with for so long he might have believed he'd never be caught. The Detroit community, those who remembered the case and those who learned of it through news coverage of the trial, reacted with a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that justice had finally been served. Sorrow that it had taken so long, that Shanice's family had waited so many years. The East Side neighborhood where Shanice had lived had changed significantly in the intervening decades. The apartment building where she died had been converted to condominiums. New families lived where old questions had haunted hallways. But for one day in December 2023, that neighborhood remembered a young nursing student who'd been stolen from the world, and they remembered that even after decades of silence, the truth can speak. Detective Sarah Mendez, interviewed after the trial, said something that stayed with reporters. "Cold cases don't stay cold because we forget them. They stay cold because we haven't found the right key yet. Sometimes it's new technology. Sometimes it's a witness who finally speaks. Sometimes it's just time passing until the pieces align. Shanice Williams waited 27 years for her story to be told completely. We owed it to her not to stop looking for that key. Raymond Booker, the original detective, now 74 and living in retirement, was contacted by Dorothy Williams after the verdict. They met for coffee at a diner in Highland Park, the same neighborhood where Shanice had grown up. Booker, who'd carried the weight of the unsolved case for years, told Dorothy he was sorry it had taken so long. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You didn't forget her," she said. "That's what mattered. You never forgot."